members of the public. I also want to welcome any guests or members of the public joining us here today. During this meeting, we have three major topics that we're going to cover. We're first going to hear from our commission's 6 work groups. They've been working really hard through the summer. I can attest because I see all the the number of meetings on my calendar week over week. So I know we've had a very busy summer with all the different working groups, and today they're going to report out around the scope of the work they've been doing and just some of the topics that they're digging into. We're then going to hear about the site visits that were conducted in the last month. So we're going to hear about the 2 employers that we hosted at the Eastern Shore, and then we'll talk a little bit about the apprenticeship roundtable that was conducted in Baltimore City last week. And finally, we're going to have some initial findings from the employer survey that was conducted by the Schaefer Center for Public Policy this summer. And so I think there will be some really nice insights that are going to come out of that for our commission as well. Before I get started, a couple of housekeeping items for us to keep in mind. First, this session is being recorded, so it's expected to be made public and publicly available on the commission's webpage on the DLS website in the next few days. The agenda for today's meeting was also shared with members of the commission directly and is also posted on the General Assembly's website. Future meeting notices and agendas will be posted there as well. We're expected to conclude the meeting today at 3. But if we can cover all the items on our agenda before then, we'll close early. Agendas, meeting links, and other commission materials are going to be posted on the commission's website. We will not be responding to comments or questions posted in the webinar chat today, but if you do have questions or comments you'd like to share after the meeting, you can do so by emailing apprenticeship2030@ubalt.edu. And I think we can put that, in the chat for everybody. And the Schaefer Center is going to forward that to the commission members to answer. And then there are going to be times during today's meeting when the commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions or to comment. And I just ask the commission members on this Zoom that if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand or use that raise hand function to indicate you've got a comment or a question. So with that, let's move right into the review of our working group activities. As I mentioned, we established 6 working groups earlier this year to conduct research and really to discuss various issues that employers and the state of Maryland are facing, right, in meeting our charge on the commission. And I want to reiterate, our charge on the commission is to expand registered apprenticeships in industry sectors with skill shortages. We have a goal of increasing the number of registered apprenticeships to at least 60,000 by 2030, and to reach the Blueprint for Maryland Future's goal of 45% of those high school graduates completing the high school level of a registered apprenticeship. I've asked each of our working group chairs today to provide a short update about the work they've undertaken this year. I suggest we let all 6 chairs present, and then we can have a discussion on the work overall. And so let's start jumping right into it. So I'm going to start with basically the working group on addressing barriers to high school and youth apprenticeships, chaired by Myra Norton and co-chaired by Senator Mary Beth Carrozza. Myra, over to you.
Thanks, Jake. Great to see you all today. So let me talk briefly through our kind of the summary of the work of our work group. We are focused on addressing barriers to high school and youth apprenticeships. If you want to move to the next slide, we started our very first meeting was looking at what were the recommendations that were made in the interim report that relate to our work group. And so I'm not going to read through all of these. This material will be available, but I will highlight the area. You can see some of these have already been completed. Those that are kind of in progress, yellow line means this is in progress. One is the recommendation that the Department of Budget Management consult the original DLS Blueprint fiscal note and Governor's Workforce Development Board and CTE committee staff on what budget and staffing resources are needed. So this is in progress. We did receive our requested budget for FY25, but are still working on FY26. So this will be an ongoing process, just figuring out what is the mandate of the committee and what are the resources needed to fulfill that mandate. Recommendation number 4 is not yet complete. The CTE committee fully agrees that this is something that needs to be done. This is another budget question. A communications campaign of this scale again, takes resources. So the question of both where this should sit and where the resources come from, that's something that needs to be sorted out. Recommendation 5, this is about studying, looking at adapting high school performance evaluation metrics to incorporate metrics for career readiness, including academic, technical, and employability skills and registered apprenticeships. Currently, high schools are heavily weighted toward college readiness metrics versus successful work outcomes. This is very much in progress too. MSDE has issued a relatively new college and career readiness standard and guidance. And so we're going to be studying that and watching kind of how that plays out. So this is very much in progress and will be a continued point of discussion. Recommendation 7 is that the Attorney General and Maryland Commission on Civil Rights issue public guidance to employers and to the public, making clear that age discrimination against young people who can work legally is against the law in Maryland. We have a question mark here because we are certainly referencing that. The CTE committee is referencing that in our guidance, but we're not sure whether public guidance has been issued here. And the same thing with recommendation number 9. So just highlighting, those are 2 things we probably want to check in on as a commission. And then the last 2 that are in progress, recommendation 10 and 12. Recommendation 10 is working with the Maryland Department of Human Services to analyze potential loss of temporary cash assistance. CTE committee staff has been working on this and we are already working to clarify the guidance so that people understand that this should not be the case when students are participating in apprenticeships. And then recommendation number 12, that MSDE consider ways in which the in-school requirements might be adjusted to better support students completing an apprenticeship. That is also very much underway and in conversation, and certainly a part of what we're about to share here in terms of our work group. So if you want to move to the next slide. These are the potential barriers that we have discussed to date as a working group. One is transportation issues. We had a number of conversations about what are the current barriers that exist. Those barriers vary across LEAs and across depending on the types of apprenticeships and what is required, what employers need. We've talked about there are some, I would describe low-hanging fruit actions that we may be coming back to recommend here that could make providing transportation to students easier. So more to come there. Number 2 is recruiting employers to sponsor high school students in apprenticeships. This is critical. I'm going to talk about sort of in the 2 meetings that our work group has had to date. We uncovered 2 real key strategic issues that we'll talk about, and this is one of them really. This question of what is the strategy for recruiting employers to sponsor high school students in apprenticeships is really critical to actually uncovering what the barriers are that need to be addressed, LEA by LEA and employer by employer, et cetera. Number 3, we talked about ensuring school schedules support apprenticeships. Again, the challenges there vary LEA to LEA, and understanding what we have come to understand as a group is that really understanding what the issues are and how the schedules need to be adjusted are heavily dependent on where are the apprenticeships coming from, who are the employers, and what is needed. Graduation requirements. So we talked about looking at the current graduation requirements at all prohibitive for students who are in apprenticeship, and does that need to be revisited? And then finally, how to provide high school students access to apprenticeable occupations with higher minimum ages. So how do we get them into apprenticeships where they can begin working in high school if the minimum age is 18, for example. And then I believe my last slide is what surfaced in these conversations is really these 2 critical strategic issues that our work group needs kind of some guidance from other work groups to help surface some of these things. So when we started talking about what the barriers are to making available the high school level of a registered apprenticeship, there are 2 things. Number 1, the barriers are wholly dependent on who are the employers, what are the jobs, and what are the requirements? What do we need to do to make it possible for students to participate in those apprenticeships? And so we really need to understand what is the strategy for employer recruitment, and not just here are the key industries, but what are the types of roles, jobs, and what do we anticipate the demand to be, so that we can understand what are the actual needs? What are the transportation needs? What are the school scheduling needs? Because those are really going to vary based on the apprenticeship itself. And then number two, an acknowledgement that there is variability across LEAs for all of this. One, access to employers that can offer apprenticeships. Two, just the types of barriers, different LEA. This became very apparent with folks that joined our work group, who are in the schools, in the school systems. The challenges that they face differ across LEAs. And so we need to develop, there are some strategies that can be deployed statewide. Many of them are going to need to be right-sized for each LEA. So those were two really big kind of takeaways from our group that I think it's important for the commission to understand. That's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. Let's move on to the next work group, expanding registered apprenticeships in the state workforce. That is chaired by Denise Gilmore and co-chaired by Chris McLarian. Denise, over to you.
All right, well, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? We're good. All right. Well, so our work group, the Public Sector Apprenticeship Work Group, met on Tuesday, August 20th for the first time. Actually, we've got a great mix of state and local government employers, as well as union presidents and members on the work group. Chris McLarian from the Department of Labor is our co-chair, so I definitely want to shout him out too. This fall, we're going to be working to develop guidelines for apprenticeships here in, state and local governments in Maryland. Some of the proposed areas of focus that we reached consensus on at this meeting, we do want to do a review of the public sector workforce here in Maryland. We want to examine the registered apprenticeships that are already out there and create best practices and a checklist for establishing and maintaining apprenticeships. We also want to have a discussion on how public sector apprentices are tracked and how these opportunities are advertised. And we want to set some boundaries on the use of intermediaries and have a discussion on the reciprocity of registered apprenticeships in the public sector. We had a really robust conversation in this first meeting. Work group members expressed the need to include both existing workers and new workers in our focus on new apprenticeship opportunities. We also discussed youth apprenticeships. So, Myra, perhaps we should connect. We had a pretty good conversation on this, and also discussed the age limits for public sector jobs and how they relate to youth apprenticeships that are currently being set up in some places in the public sector. I'll say as we've dug in kind of since then, some areas, youth workers right now are honestly just being kind of cycled in and out as temporary workers with no real useful certification or career prospects at the end of the apprenticeship period. This can go on. We've seen that this can go on for several years at some places. We do need to talk through, I think, some more how this is undermining like the bargaining units where workers are represented by the union. I think that's probably going to be a continuing conversation this fall. President McMillan from ATU 1300 talked quite a bit about an apprenticeship program they negotiated at the MTA that we look forward to hearing more about that seemed to tackle some of these issues. I'd say it was also really helpful to hear from employers about the challenges they face with getting PINs or full-time positions funded, for apprentices and for more mentors. It was a really robust conversation. We look forward to having more of these this fall. I think, again, to me at least, the biggest thing that stands out between setting up apprenticeships in the private sector and the public sector is just, again, this question of funding it properly and making sure we have enough positions to do this right. So That certainly means that apprenticeships have an opportunity to advance into a position, and in order to avoid kind of bargaining infringement issues, in the unionized public sector, we've also got to, figure out how to make these, bargaining ineligible from day one. So these will, be conversations we're going to continue to have this fall, and glad to have the work group.
Thank you, Denise. Next up, we're going to go to the work group on employer and sponsor recruitment. That's chaired by Brian Cavey and co-chaired by Sarah Shepard.
All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So we actually started meeting pretty quickly. We met the first time on June 7th. And we talked about, well, first we went through some introductions, because we did have one new member. Aaron Roth left to go chair another group. So we picked up Jason Perkins Cohen from the Department of Labor, and everyone else is the same as our work group from last year. We discussed the purpose of the group, like Jake just said, recruitment and retention of new sponsors, and expansion of apprenticeship. And then we went on to discuss some of the recommendations we made last year. One of them was that the State Department of Labor should hire more apprenticeship navigators. And that has been followed up on, that the state now has 35 staff in the apprenticeship program. So I think we need to give them a little time to get going. And there was legislation this year that the department actually is required to give a report about apprenticeship programs that I think is due in October. So that should help us see how the new staff is working out. Then there went on to discussion about intermediaries, because last year that's what this work group was about intermediaries. And there was quite a bit discussion about how that there is talk all over about intermediaries that don't necessarily do a real good job. They take the funding and don't do a good job. So that if we are going to move forward with intermediaries, the state needs to have a very thorough vetting process for the intermediaries. We talked with Safall Partners last year. They were good enough to get on a meeting and stayed on for a couple hours and answered all of our questions. And they gave us a questionnaire that looks to be great to use. And we think that the Department of Labor needs to probably now get that questionnaire and manipulate it to however they want to. Some of the questions may be a little vague and they may need more detail. Some may be too detailed. So it just needs to be changed to fit with the Department of Labor. And I was only holding them for an hour, so that was an hour's discussion. By the end of the meeting, we said that we're going to meet every Friday, or every first Friday of the month. The first Friday of July was July 5th, day after the holiday, so we actually met on Monday the 8th. So the second meeting, we started a discussion about group programs. And Grant Schmelzer from the IEC is on the group, and he talked about him being a sponsor of a group program, and that they're always looking for new employers, and we need to make sure that people that enter group programs or that sponsor group programs know that recruiting new employers is something that is ongoing all the time. You get a group program and you get a number of employers signed up, and whatever that is, 6. Don't be happy with 6. Go get 7, go get 8. Keep growing. And referrals can be a big part of that recruitment process. But we went on to talk about that education about apprenticeship is key. As sponsors, we know what it takes to educate young people about apprenticeship. But we need to also educate businesses about apprenticeship. We're trying to recruit a whole bunch of new people that have their way of training new employers or new employees, and apprenticeship's going to be new to them. So we need to come up with a system to educate those people, and that led into a discussion about marketing apprenticeship. Marketing is going to take funding, probably going to take a lot of funding. We talked about who needs to be involved. State, local, county agencies should be involved. Workforce development agencies, chambers of commerce, and current sponsor groups, the unions, the group programs in construction, and other apprenticeship group sponsors that can help us to create this marketing program. Our hour was up, and we went on to try and meet in August, and unfortunately personal issues came up and we had to cancel the August meeting. So our next meeting is tomorrow, is the first Friday in September. And I wish I would have put together a nice PowerPoint like Myra did, but all that I did was make an outline. Very nice, Myra.
Thank you, Brian. All right, next up, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron Roth, who has been working with, co-chaired with Senator Augustine here on the work group on simplifying the sponsorship process. So Aaron, over to you.
So, maybe we're able to, could we just, is there a way to mute?
Hey, Jim, can you mute yours?
Thank you. So yes, so Senator Augustine and I have been hard at work. We started over the course of the early summer, really making sure we have the right range of perspectives at the table when you're talking about simplifying the registration process. You know, in our minds, employers, legislators, the apprenticeship council members who know that process well, existing sponsors from a wide range, frankly, of traditional and non-traditional apprenticeship programs and industries felt important to bring to the table. Local workforce directors are so key to this work. So we have a good smattering of those representatives. And we even work to bring on a multi-state sponsor perspective to the discussion so that we can understand from our peers across the country and why the sponsor chose Maryland instead of any other state to register their national program. And also, you know, there are good reasons there, but also what could we learn from others? And so I think we spent a little time getting organized and making sure we have the right people at the table. Our first meeting happened on August 26th, so just last week. To kick things off, we basically brainstormed the different pain points that we might want to look at when we're talking about simplifying the registration process, got all of the issues on the table, and we will meet actually tomorrow, just like Brian Cavy's group, to focus in on how we can leverage technology to make this process more business friendly and easier and more efficient and faster, all of those things. And so other states have taken that work on, but I think helping our group really dig into that and understand where the opportunities are to use technology as our friend is something that we really want to make sure that we dig into. I do think there could be an investment conversation there and a recommendation brewing for our final report. Then, because we had a robust conversation where we brainstormed lots of different ideas as our second bucket of kind of work to take on, we decided to survey our committee. And so we sent out a survey, I guess, last Wednesday to the group. It closed, I think, last night. So we'll be looking to understand what each of those wide range of perspectives think are the three other big things we should focus on. Senator Augustine and I will take that info in, and then we are on the books to meet again on October 4th. So that meeting will continue the work and build out what these recommendations are. But it did seem from the initial conversations, at least to me, that how we can leverage technology to make this process easier on businesses really did bubble up as the number one thing that the group wants to focus on, both in terms of helping the employer navigate the rules and the rules of the road. This is me talking, but I think of like H&R Block when I do my taxes. Like, taxes are very complicated, but H&R Block makes it easy for me to it kind of puts you right in front of you, like, here are the simple things in plain language you need to do, and it pre-populates, and there are all these different things that lots of other entities, private sector, nonprofit, et cetera, do this already, but we've not had that infrastructure. So I think that conversation will likely take us a long way. Other topics that the group is considering taking on are things like helping employers better understand the incentive and resource landscape, potentially looking at the council meeting formats, registered apprenticeship reciprocity for other programs crossing state lines, potentially digging into how the Labor Department apprenticeship staff, which Mr. Kavey mentioned recently, expanded quite dramatically. We're still actually making offers and staffing up, but how do those staff spend their time, right? And is it do we feel like that's kind of the right thing? That could be something we take on, the role of intermediaries as a complement to the state staff, to support businesses in developing and frankly also selling these opportunities and helping businesses to understand the value. We may take on looking at mentorship ratios in different occupations like non-hazardous occupations. And I think those are some of the surveys, just to give you a flavor of the types of things we may also decide to cover. I will pause there and see if my co-chair, Senator Augustine, might have anything to add.
Nothing to add. I think you covered it really well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to a very busy working group, which is chaired by Senator Jim Rosapep and co-chaired by Delegate Wu, which is really around public sector tools and accelerators. So over to you, Jim. You're on mute, Jim.
There we go. I know. I just need to. That's what I was doing. Good. All right. So we have had a series of meetings throughout the summer with a lot of support from the Schaefer Center and from Bob Lehrman with the Urban Institute, with a whole variety of research information we asked them to pull together. You want to go to the next slide? So these were topics that we have looked at, and basically we did like 2 topics a meeting, and then when there were outstanding questions, we'd come back to the next meeting and get answers to those questions. And I'll just run down them quickly. They mostly were covered in the interim report to one degree or another. So the first one is the tax credits. We got information on exactly how the current tax credits have been used in a review of what other states do on tax credits to get a feeling for what the state of play is. Secondly, licensed professions. We had quite a deep dive in that. We still have more work to do on that, but basically, there are a lot of licensed professions just on the Labor Department, and then another set of licensed occupations in the Health Department, and then 1 or 2 in other agencies. We haven't dealt with the Health Department yet, but we've had pretty extensive conversations that are continuing with the licensing boards in the Labor Department. Where there are existing apprenticeships, but where there seems to be a great opportunity for expansion. It gets a little complicated quickly, and we can dive into that at the appropriate point. But I think we expect to have some very specific recommendations related to expanding apprenticeships in licensed occupations. Then post-high school RTI subsidies, again, looking around for money, basically. What are options? What are current federal and state programs that can be used? What kind of costs are we talking about? We haven't done the modeling yet, but that'll be coming up in the next month or so. We found that a number of states, including Maryland to a very small extent, use the UI tax system in various ways to support apprenticeships. And so we're doing more research on that to explore how that might work. And then we've done a deeper dive than the briefings we had last fall on how other countries have done it, because those are models that exist, that work, that have scaled, and so we want to draw on the best thinking there. We touched on marketing a bit, but I realize the other work group is taking that on. So we ought to be sure, Sarah. I presume that the work that we had on that has been shared with the other group. Now, state procurement, that's another big one that we looked at. And there we looked at how the procurement laws are used now to accomplish other state objectives. And I must say, I was stunned at how many ways we use the procurement laws. I thought there were like 2 or 3, and they're like 30 or 40. And we looked at various models. And in particular, in construction, there's a very specific, relatively recent law that gives a procurement preference to construction firms that have apprenticeship programs. And if they don't have apprenticeship programs, then they pay a certain amount into the state apprenticeship fund. And so one of the things we're looking at is expanding that concept and some other procurement concepts out into other areas of state procurement. Public service apprenticeships we touched on, and we know there was the other public service apprenticeship work group. But the point I want to make here, and this is something we just need to coordinate with Denise and Chris's group, is federal agency apprenticeships as well as state and local government apprentices. Because the Biden administration put out an executive order at the beginning of the year requiring the federal agencies to explore apprenticeships in federal agencies. And obviously, we've got a lot of federal agencies in Maryland. I believe that federal report is supposed to come back September, October. So we'll see what they've come up with. But someone, either we or Denise and Chris's group, I think, need to focus some attention on the federal government opportunities. Altogether, about 20% of working people in Maryland work for a state, federal, or local government. So it's a big chunk of the market. And the last one is existing non-apprenticeship training subsidies. And again, we had the Schaefer Center did a workup on what's there. We discussed some of them. We're going to come back and try to integrate what's possible. Obviously, strategically, the blueprint puts as much RTI into high school as possible, but the post high school RTI issue is going to continue to be an issue. And so figuring out how we can take existing programs and maximize the use of them. I think at the end of the day, we're still going to need to have new state money. But if we can coordinate with the money that's already there, it'll save everybody a lot of time and energy. So that's what we've talked about. We'll go to the next slide. Working with the data and insights work group. That's really important, because in order to figure out what tools you use and how you use them, you need to know what you're shooting at. And so, again, the State Department of Labor economics staff and Lehrman from the Urban Institute have put together various estimates on job openings projected out, several years. And they're refining that now. We expect to have, I guess, within the next couple of weeks, an updated, strengthened version of that. Because basically the idea is to say, look, if we're going to get to 60, well, we got to get to 60,000. We already have like 12,000. So we really are talking about getting 48,000. And obviously the overwhelming number of the 12,000 are in construction and in existing apprenticeship programs by definition. So where there's potential growth there, but not nearly as much growth as there is in the other sectors. And so being able to break that out by occupation and by industry will make it much easier for really all the work groups, but specifically the one for public sector tools, to be able to figure out where to focus. Next, we're going to have model the variety of financial tools, which we have not done yet. We've looked at what other people have done, but we haven't modeled how things might work in Maryland. That's the next step. And then developing draft recommendation options. And we're going to begin discussing that at our next work group meeting. That's it. Xiao, did you want to add anything? Is Xiao here? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. And finally, final work group here related to what Jim was talking about is data insights. It's chaired by Avanet Blanding and co-chaired by Rachel Parker. So Avanet, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Jim, Senator Roosevelt did steal some of my thunder there.
Sorry about that.
So the Data Insights Work Group did meet in July, and we started to talk about what types of data needed to be collected and identifying some targets. We then had a call with Bob Lehrman and Mike Sears and Department of Labor to talk about the data to be collected, identifying apprenticeable occupations, and really getting that data and understanding what it means, how we separate it, how we review it, analyze it. And we're working on scheduling an additional meeting where we can review additional analysis from Bob Lehrman on some of those apprenticeable occupations, what should be, if anything, should be excluded. Their thoughts on include everything. Everything should be able to become an apprenticeship. but we have additional work to do. So Rachel, do you want to add anything there?
Thank you so much, Chair Blanding. I think you covered it really well. I think the only thing I'll mention is since that last conversation in August with Bob Lerman with the Urban Institute and the Department of Labor chief economist and his team, along with the apprenticeship team in the Department of Labor, they've actually had a chance to kind of sync up Mike Sayers and Bob Lerman a little bit further as they kind of take progress on these next steps. So excited to see what they bring back. And I also wanted to just acknowledge this will, as I believe was mentioned earlier, this will sort of intersect with work the Governor's Workforce Development Board, Career and Technical Education Committee is doing and working. We're working together in a coordinated fashion to develop targets relating to the Blueprint's 45% goal, in addition to the 60,000 apprentice goal that this commission has. And so all of this data, getting our baseline for what it looks like right now so we understand where we need to go and also understand what tools and resources to inform groups like gyms, for instance, might be needed to really get us all the way to some of those targets. So thank you. And thanks to all of the partners who've been involved for all the real legwork with the data to inform this work group. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all the chairs who just presented just now and for the working group members, right, for everything they've worked on. I know it's been a very busy summer. So that being said, I'd like to open this up now for discussion and comments from our commission. So if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Aaron? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so exciting to have so many stakeholders working towards growing apprenticeship. I wondered, Myra, my question is for you and your work group, actually. I'm so glad that you're focusing on the transportation barriers. And I totally agree that, it looks a little different in different places and the needs are different by industry. And, I wondered if you explored driver's education as a part of the solution, and how you, and if not, like, is it something that you might be willing to explore?
Yeah, and Senator Carozza, please jump in as my co-chair if I miss anything here. But we did talk about that. We talked about a number of things. We talked about looking at the number of passengers that are allowed in transportation vehicles that are already transporting students. We talked about driver's ed also as a solution. All of these, we came down to, yes, these are potential solutions. We need to understand what the demand is. So for example, again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. Till we understand these are the jobs. These are the types of jobs that we are targeting. This is the actual transportation need. So is it what we talked about? Is there multiple avenues here? Is it that a student needs to be transported from a school to a job site? Is it that we need to look at potentially public vehicles to provide space near schools for employers to leverage as jobs? Like there are so many different permutations of this. To actually solve this problem, we need to understand what the strategy is for recruiting like where are we targeting? What are the jobs? Are these jobs in hospitals? Okay, if so, like then what does that mean? Are these jobs do you like I still don't know how this happens, but at some point there will probably be balloons that go off. That seems to happen to me in any public meeting. I do something with my hands. So, just enjoy. But I hope that answers your question. Yes, we talked about all of those things and again came to there are some probably base level recommendations we could make, but this all comes down to who are the employers? What are the jobs? What are the needs of those jobs? What do employers need students to be able to do to fulfill the needs of those jobs? That's what.
And if I could add to that, I think that what we have found is that when we can work with employers, so the relationships with the employers is so essential, which to me would lead to giving some flexibility with how we go about whether it's a transportation challenge. So for example, and I'll go into more detail when I present our site visits, but at Delaware Elevator, those employers the Delaware Elevator having they have both the registered adult and the registered youth apprenticeship. Their people are so invested to being mentors to the apprentices that they were actually on their own working through some transportation issues, with the employees actually stepping up in some cases and doing some partnering. And I just use that as an example because I think, as Chair Norton said, it may depend on the individual situations, but if we're able to support flexibility to encourage those type of partnerships and those other options, we would be, as a commission, doing a good service.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Senator Rosapep, then Senator Carozza, and then Denise after that.
I was actually just going to ask if Richard would fill the group in on what's going on the driver's ed study.
I had my camera come on because I speculated you're going to toss this my way. So we have a solicitation that just released yesterday. There was some money tied to a JCR report that's due in December, where we will be reporting a number of aspects around transportation, not only around driver's ed, but also all the way to commercial transportation, the gig economy, those sort of things. So really a broad view of all of the opportunities that could exist. And then as part of the report, we're also leveraging suggestions on how some of these pathways could be designed and developed to support students up to graduation. And then in some areas, for example, with interstate commercial trucking, leading to a full CDL license once that student is beyond age 18. There is also some additional money that was provided to the agency, to MSDE, to not only expand, but also explore additional opportunities around driver's education programs. And so that's currently being managed through the transportation office at MSDE. And, I can gather some more information and provide that as well. But I also believe there'll be a report with, those funds and sort of how that growth has been reconceptualized or implemented along the driver's education space as well.
All right, thank you, Richard. Over to you, Senator Carozza.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted first, Mr. Chair, and to my friends and colleagues on this commission, there is incredible work that's being done in each one of these work groups. And what I'm seeing is the work that's being done in the individual work groups, we're all also trying to use to apply in our own areas. And, as this all comes together, whatever that next step is to ensure that the good information that we're picking up, which obviously is the purpose of a call like this, is really leveraged, because I believe that we can really, I believe just by focusing on this, we're providing all new opportunities for our young people and for our young adults who might not have even thought about these pathways before. And one quick comment on the driver's ed, when I'm not sure how much we've tied the driver's ed to the career pathway. And maybe we can start doing that at, maybe a younger age, because something has changed over the course of time. I mean, obviously when driver's ed was free in the schools, we were all, pursuing our license, but there's something else going on in our society where when you talk to young people, they're not really anxious or as excited to get their license as certainly I was when I was that age. And I don't know if there's a way, maybe it goes to our communications as part of our strategy of linking that, that driver's ed with, your career path and actually becoming more independent. So I really have appreciated this focus on driver's ed, because I really do think it opens up, it opens up that pathway for their career, but it might also just have them thinking about their own independence. So I'm throwing that out there. If there's any way on the communications end that we might be able to link that and start earlier, maybe in the school system, to plant that seed.
Thank you, Senator Caruso. Denise?
Yeah, thanks. This is possibly a question or suggestion on the youth apprenticeship group again. I guess I'm curious if this already exists. I was surprised in a conversation I had with an employer yesterday, actually, in which they asked about their obligations to pay like overtime for youth apprentices. I'm curious if there's like a wage and hour guidelines that have been developed around youth apprenticeship yet, or is that something I know DOL has to do? I think several maybe guidelines already is, kind of wage and hour guidance for
That is
for
a
these
great
apprentice and
question.
blossom.
I have zero idea. Do my colleagues from the Department of Labor know do we have, I mean, I know we have I think at our committee meeting, there's like 17 high school students in the entire state of Maryland that are currently in registered apprenticeships. So I don't know, do we have any, or is there any wage guidance?
Is Chris on the call?
Chris is on the call. I think he wasn't admitted to the, I guess, with the rest of the commissioners maybe. But do you mind saying the question in a different way? I want to make sure that I can respond and have Chris and
sure. I guess I'm curious if wage and hour guidance for employers already exists as it relates to youth apprenticeships. And if it doesn't, if that's something that we could potentially add as part of the work we do here.
Sure. I know that Chris on our apprenticeship team, of course, is working very closely with Commissioner Verk, who oversees that portfolio for the department. But I would want to let him chime in on the details of exactly where that is and how that process regularly works. Thank you, Chris.
I think Chris is in, maybe.
Yep.
Chris?
Chris should be here, or at least allowed to speak, can speak.
I think I'm
there he is
now, so I'm going to check before I start talking.
Chris, did you hear the question? I just want to make sure.
I did. Thanks. And Denise, it's a great question. For a student, for a minor or an adult, if you're in a registered apprenticeship program, they must follow the standards of apprenticeship and the wages that are outlined. So whether you're 16 or you're 66, if the percentage of an apprentice starting pay, for example, is 50%, and the journey worker rate's $40, whether you're a minor or an adult, they have to start at 50% of that $40 rate. So age is not a factor whatsoever in a registered apprenticeship program. For youth apprenticeship, they must follow, so the employers have to submit to us the wages that they're going to pay. They must pay that wage, which has to be minimum wage or higher, and there is no exemptions for being a minor or being a small employer for minimum wage exemptions. It's just full pay for the youth. So before I stop, I want to just check with Denise if I answered the question or if there was something that I missed.
And specific to overtime, they're overtime eligible, I assume.
Sure. Great question. I would suspect that for a student to be eligible for overtime, it's likely going to occur in the summer, and the overtime laws have to be followed regardless. So if it's overtime after 40 hours and the student works 42 hours, they would be eligible for 2 hours of overtime pay. If you have a collective bargaining agreement or MOU and the student is a member of a union, that takes precedence and you might get overtime after 8 hours or something to that effect. But the same rules apply for a minor as they would, and the working conditions they would for an adult.
So again, I was surprised to get the question yesterday by an employer. I think it might be worth, if we can, clarifying.
Absolutely.
Employers. Yeah. I appreciate that, Chris.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris, I'm just going to add to Chris is that there is no exemption for any of the laws, minimum wage, overtime, anything, for whether it's registered apprenticeship or youth apprenticeship. All of those regulations have to be followed. And then, if there is something that makes it better, then okay. But you know, what apprentice or not an apprentice, employers have to pay minimum wage, overtime, so on and so forth.
Thank you. Evanette, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I actually had a comment on the driver's education. I like the idea of promoting it more because it is an element of freedom and would allow students and adults in apprenticeship programs to probably have more opportunities as far as the travel side. My concern would be understanding the cost impact to families, because if you're driving, you'll probably have to pay car insurance, and there's the cost of the vehicle. And for some youth and young adults, there's a financial impact to it. Even though you can have your license, you still may not have transportation available to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Evanette. Other comments, feedback, questions from commission members here? I had one question maybe for Denise. You had mentioned earlier around your working group is exploring some of the things that are happening with intermediaries. Can you maybe kind of expand on that a little bit, and sort of what are some of those areas that you particularly are, your working group is concerned about? Like what are some practices you're seeing out there today?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had that meeting yet, so I don't want to, you know, speak on behalf of the work group yet. I want to, you know, get some more feedback on it. But I think there is a question to the extent that intermediaries necessarily need to play a role where there is a union there, right? So I think figuring that out first, and then around the use of intermediaries, making sure that they're regulated so that we're not, you know, siphoning public funds to support intermediaries, that, you know, public funds that could be used for children's playgrounds, you know.
Got it. Thank you. Well, if there are no other comments or questions, I want to thank again all our working group chairs and members. As you know, the next full meeting of our commission is going to be scheduled for October 10th. And at that meeting, the goal really is for the working groups then to, you know, continue to sort of report out on the progress since this meeting, but more importantly is also to present their proposed initial recommendations, right? And I want to call out that, you know, our final meeting of the year is going to be December 5th, where our intention is to vote and finalize on those recommendations so we can actually deliver a final report by the end of the year. So, so again, I really applaud the tremendous work that's been happening, and I want to thank, and I know it's a lot going forward. We've got a pretty tight schedule. That means I see Senator Carozza, your hand is raised again.
I didn't know, were we wrapping up, or did you still want an update on the Eastern Shore site visits?
Oh yeah, we're moving on to that next slide.
It sounded like we were wrapping up, so I was.
No, so moving on to the next, really, I want to kind of talk a bit about the site visits. So part of the research that this commission, our commission members have undertaken this summer has really been site visits and seeing apprenticeships in action. At our previous meeting, Brian Cavey had hosted us over at the Insulators Union, and that was a great sort of up close view into sort of how the Insulators Union runs their apprenticeship. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the site visit on the Eastern Shore because I got COVID that week, but I understand that commission members met with staff from both Delaware Elevator and Seaside Plumbing, two companies of kind of very different sizes, but also both operating apprenticeship programs. And I'd like to have Senator Carozza maybe give us a summary of how that event went.
Thank you. And I want to, thank all the commission members and the staff for participating. And I special shout out for the Lower Shore Workforce Alliance. Bob Hendricks was key in organizing it. And we also had the leadership of Leslie Porter Cabell, and our president of the Lower Eastern Shore Tri-County Council participated, which from a regional standpoint, which is the way we really have to go in these smaller counties, that was crucial to have their participation. Our first stop was at Delaware Elevator, which is based in Salisbury, Maryland, to clarify for everyone. And I think just to put this in context, Delaware Elevator does work state, regional, national, and international. And so I think that it's very specialized, and they have both the adult and the youth apprenticeship, registered apprenticeships. And there were some takeaways for me locally, and then takeaways for us as a commission. Locally, I found just by engaging that I had made the assumption that Delaware Elevator had partnerships with the local school systems in all 3 of my counties, only to find out it was 2 out of 3. So that immediately was, a signal for me to see if I could step in and help with that partnership, again, with our shared mission of increasing apprenticeships across the board. And then one really takeaway that I thought was important for this group from that site visit is that the youth apprenticeship completion takes 1 year off of the overall apprenticeship for the adult apprenticeship. And that really seemed to, kind of a real incentive for the employers, but obviously from what we've been talking about, how these youth apprenticeships can be, steps into the adult apprenticeships as well. So I thought that was a good example. Our second stop was Seaside Plumbing, and Mr. Chair, you received a very thoughtful email from the Vice President of Seaside Plumbing. Her name is Lauren Martin, and she has been passionate about apprenticeships. And I was going to ask if that email could be shared to the whole commission, but a couple highlights that I did want to share, because she was, I think she wanted to report back to you, Mr. Chair, since you weren't able to make it. And she had asked me, she asked me, I said, just write to the chair directly and fill them in. And when you look at her email, first of all, you can see her passion. She obviously wants us to know that they're small and locally owned, and that they have grown this business from just one van, her husband, to a team of over 75 employees. And also one of that, when you have these really invested employers, she also serves as treasurer for the national nonprofit Explore the Trades. So she has, as an employer, has totally bought in on, having this be a career for our young people, but also the hitting the shortage problems head on. And just in her email, she said, plumbers are the unsung heroes of public health. Access to proper sanitation and clean water defines the line between developed and developing nations. Just and I'm just thinking how she's communicating about this plumbing as a trade, and how we can do that not only with plumbing, with other trades as well, to me really sparks some excitement for our young people. She pointed out to you that they invested their own money into their own in-house training program, which we were able to see. And they did have 3 apprenticeships, adult apprenticeships there with us, who had just celebrated their first phase of passage of their apprenticeship. So it was a pretty exciting day when we went to Seaside. 2 issues that we got into detail, and this is what was also nice about this site visit. The employer could really go into detail about the 2 issues that she wanted to bring to our attention. One I know you've heard about before, which was the tax credits. The fact that she, as a small plumbing company, business that only does residential work, has not been able to tap that tax credit because of the 50% prevailing wage. And we got into an in-depth discussion there. And I was really happy that Delegate Ebersol participated, because he is on the House Ways and Means Committee, and he was he was, I think, becoming creative. And I know Senator Rosa Pepp has been part of these discussions about a very narrow, targeted approach to that particular issue. But for her to be able to do that on site with our commission, she really felt like she was being heard. And I think she wanted us to see her commitment. The other issue that she wanted to bring to the commission's attention was the challenges with licensing. And she points out, and I know that there's those on this commission that are far more knowledgeable, but I wanted to better understand that. She pointed out that trades like HVAC and electrical have removed their journeyman's licensure exam, but plumbing has not. And she pointed out that Delaware, our neighboring state, literally in my district, 5 minutes over the line, does not require a journeyman's exam. And so her point was to work with us on how we can make the whole licensing process fair, free of some of these barriers. And her last point to the commission was when we go beyond the trades and to some other industries that don't yet have apprenticeships, she believes it's going to be important, especially if they're smaller, to have similar type tax credits that were supposed to be designed for her business as well. So I really wanted to, there was a lot of excitement at that stop, a lot of hands-on, and there are others who participated may want to comment, but I thought she did a really good job of really narrowing in on those two issues, the tax credits and the licensing, for us to give serious consideration to her recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Rosa. And I do want to applaud her email, because you can tell you could see the enthusiasm, the commitment, dedication that she has towards apprenticeships. And clearly, just given her own success story, you can see that it can be an engine of growth for small businesses in our state as well. So I really do appreciate her thoughtful email, and I think it's definitely something we'll be responding to. I'll share out. Also, last week we hosted an event at the CFG Arena. I want to thank our host, the Fearless, who actually hosted us that day for the event in their lounge. And this time we actually had a roundtable of employers. So we had a wide variety of employers from different industries, different sizes as well. And it was a great event in the sense that we had, over 4 hours. And I want to also thank our commission members who actually who were there. We had Senator Ellis was there, Senator Rosa Pepp, Delegate Ebersole, Tanya Terrell, Sarah Shepard, Denise, Brian Cavey. I want to thank, I'm probably missing some as well, but I'm grateful for the participation that day. We heard from a variety of different employers. We started today really with BGE, our hometown hero in Baltimore. And so Tanya gave us a great overview about their early career academy, around youth apprenticeships that they've been working on. And I know that's just a subset of the work that BGE and Exelon is working on in the area of apprenticeships and early career hiring. We then heard from Catalyte that really talked about tech apprenticeships and what makes those a little unique and different and how rapidly those roles are changing. We then actually moved into a great section where we actually heard from small businesses. So we heard from a company called Acquia, which was a cyber startup in Mount Laurel, as well as a company, as well as Connect Potential, which is a company in PG County. And we were able to see, even for small businesses, those have been adopting and utilizing apprenticeships have really been a differentiator in terms of how they've been able to grow and how they've been able to get a workforce that actually enables them to grow. We had a great presentation from BCR Cyber, which is actually I guess they would be an intermediary, but they actually have been partnering with the Department of Education, have launched cyber ranges across all the community colleges in our state as well. And they actually have a Maryland registered apprenticeship for cyber. And they gave a great presentation about how that career progression works. And then I think we really got into a great session really around public sector apprenticeships. And we heard from the former Secretary of the Department of IT, Michael Leahy, who also was the president of NASCIO, National Association of State CIOs. And he was, he actually was instrumental in getting at least the first pilots of apprenticeship programs going within within IT in our state. So he shared a little bit about some of the things he had to do to get that activated. We then really rolled into Maryland Department of Health, which presented how they've been utilizing apprenticeships in the delivery of some of the IT and engineering work, as well as data analytics work in the agency. And then we kind of zoomed out. We scaled up to a company called ICF, which is one of the very large federal IT contractors, which was really sharing with us just what's going on nationally, right? And they actually have been administering some of the grants on behalf of the federal government for different apprenticeships for both employers and I think in different states as well. So it was I thought it was a great perspective about things that are actually starting to move around public sector apprenticeships. And then finally, we ended the day with some industry apprenticeships. So we had a presentation from T. Rowe Price, which talked about really kind of the long-term pipelines, right? So how apprentices have actually become have become permanent employees at T. Rowe Price, and sort of the success there in the sense that they've progressed faster in their careers. They're getting their first promotions faster than their typical entry-level hires. As well as we heard from a group, Baltimore Alliance for Healthcare, which also talked about some of the healthcare apprenticeships and what they're doing to spin up apprenticeships in that sector as well. It was admittedly a little bit heavy on tech and cyber that day. I think part of it is just because I was probably able to wrangle some of those employers to come, a bit more. We made a pretty broad sort of access. So we reached out to, some organized labor. We reached out to healthcare. But I think in the end, we sort of still ended up with about 10 sort of employers that came and gave interesting sort of perspectives and case studies. So again, I want to thank all of our commission members for being a part of that day as well. And so moving on to our next section here, I'd like to now turn this over to Ann Cotton. She's the executive director at the Schaefer Center, and she's here with some of her staff members, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the Schaefer Center, but most importantly, talk about the employer survey. So just to remind everyone, one of the recommendations in our interim report was to have a survey of employers and labor unions to be conducted so we can learn more about apprenticeships that currently exist in our state and how they can be scaled up. We'd also wanted to really dig into and learn why other employers don't use apprenticeships for employee skills training. And so the Schaefer Center administered the employer portion of the survey. And today, Ann is going to give us share what her and her staff have learned so far. So with that, I'll turn that over to Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting our employer survey. You all have received a draft of the survey, and we're still in the process of doing data analysis, but wanted to get it out as quickly as possible so you could start getting some of the information. And we have a lot of open-ended analysis to continue working through to finalize our report. But you have the bulk of it in terms of the broad cuts of what we've learned from the survey. So today I'm going to talk about the methodology of the survey, the prevalence of apprenticeships in Maryland, the characteristics of apprenticeship programs, and characteristics of registered apprenticeship programs. So the methodology, we had a very large sample of businesses. We started with we have 25,000 businesses that were randomly selected in Maryland as a random sample. And then we also sampled all the businesses that had registered apprenticeships. So we had just under 26,000 businesses in our sample. And if any of you would do telephone surveying now, you know how hard it is to get anyone to complete the survey. So we had 368 respondents, and I'll talk more about that in a second. The survey was designed so it had branching for employers that have apprenticeships, those that have registered and unregistered apprenticeships, as well as those who have apprenticeships but aren't sure what their apprenticeship type was. And we also surveyed employers that did not have apprenticeships. The survey was in the field for about a month, July 12th to August 16th. And then we had an online survey version of the survey for participants who wanted to complete but didn't have time to complete on the phone. And that ended up yielding just 4 additional respondents. And then we have a customized version of the surveys for labor unions and sponsors, and that's still in the field. And thank you to commission members who are helping us increase our participation there. So when it comes to our sample and our the respondents, We had an original sample of 10,000 employers. We went through that relatively quickly, calling through all the numbers, not able to get our targeted response rate of 400. We added a supplement of another 15,000 businesses, and then we had the 940 that have a registered apprenticeship. So 67% we had no contact with, so they didn't answer the phone, they didn't respond. We ended up with 1% that actually did complete the survey. And of the 1% that completed the survey, we had 314 that completed the full survey, 50 that completed the partial survey, and then 4 that completed the survey online. So we have a potential of about 368 respondents for each of the questions. So even the respondents that submitted a partial response, we included their information when we're doing this analysis. So the prevalence of apprenticeships, just under a third of our respondents offer apprenticeships. 2/3 do not. When we look at what industries offer the apprenticeships, construction, a slight majority of our respondents in construction industry offer apprenticeships with 54%. Next, with real estate and rental and leasing with 25%, agriculture and forestry and hunting, and then some professional services, arts, entertainment at around 1/5. We had a larger group, 42%, that were other, and then others really all the businesses that had less than 5 respondents. So in our sample, so we couldn't report them out individually by category. Manufacturing, 17%, healthcare, social service assistants, 15%, and then other 42%. So other is one of those categories where we're going through and doing additional analysis and see if we can recode them back into these groups, or to do some additional analysis on them to find out who they were specifically. And there's a little variation regionally. About a third of employers report having an apprenticeship program, and a little bit less likely in the capital southern region, eastern, western Maryland, central Maryland, just about a third. And not surprisingly, smaller organizations are a little bit less likely to offer apprenticeships, but employers with 6 employees and above seem to be pretty much around the same, between 38 and 40% have apprenticeship programs. So that was a little bit surprising that there wasn't a lot of variation there. Then we look at the apprenticeship programs. When we look at the occupations, we use the U.S. Department of Labor occupational categories to look at the apprenticeships, and most of them are in construction. So we have registered and unregistered, and then those who were unsure about what type of apprenticeship program they had. So 38% of our respondents had apprenticeships in the construction industry, a construction occupation. 9% advanced manufacturing. So you can see the gap there is pretty big. It drops from 38 to 9%. Human resource administration, entry-level transportation, about 5%. So as we're seeing in what we know, it's construction industry and construction occupations are where the majority of apprenticeships are, and that was in our survey findings as well. And then most apprenticeship programs are relatively small. They have 1 to 5 apprentices in them, so not a lot of the large-scale apprenticeship programs. And then most employers are operating their apprenticeship themselves. So 56% of our employers are operating their own apprenticeship program. 22 are doing so in a group with other employers. So, and then we have the 3% that are in a labor union. And then we had, interestingly, almost a 1/5 that weren't sure how they were operating their apprenticeship program. And we look at the commitment for completing an apprenticeship program. The majority can be completed in less than 4 years, and half in less than 2 years. So a quick path to a career. But apprenticeships are very time consuming when it comes to mentorship. If we look at the data here, most of the mentoring is a half to full-time job for most of the organizations, for the mentors in these organizations. So it's not surprising that most organizations only have a few mentors when we look at the commitment it's taking for the mentor, the amount of hours the mentor is spending on that. And then most employers are providing financial support for apprenticeships. 63% provide financial support for their related training, and 80% cover almost all that cost. So 76 to 100% of that cost. And most employers that offer apprenticeships provide youth apprenticeships, so 82%. And then of those, only 41% are registered apprenticeships. So there's probably an opportunity to get the youth apprenticeships into registered apprenticeships. And then most apprenticeship programs are unregistered. So 45% are unregistered. Of our respondents, 8% had both registered and unregistered programs, and then only 34% were only registered programs. And 70% of the programs were registered in Maryland only, 5% were federally registered, and then we have 14% that were dually registered. When we look at the motivation for establishing an apprenticeship program, 13% couldn't get trained applicants, so it was really a labor issue. And then the next most common response was 7%, the benefits and requirements related to prevailing wage or Davis-Bacon Act or Inflation Reduction related acts. So some type of financial incentives. And then we had a spattering of responses with occupations that are traditionally have apprenticeships. It looked like it was something that was working in another industry or occupation, or the license and credentials, a nationally recognized certificate of completion was available. So there were also, in this case, a lot of others. So we had more other responses than we had in the predefined categories. So we'll be going through doing additional analysis of those other responses. Tax credits didn't seem to be the big driving factor for organizations with apprenticeships. So only 21% reported receiving at least one tax credit. 79% didn't use tax credits at all, didn't receive a tax credit. And then the most common tax credit among the employers that had that was the Maryland Apprenticeship Tax Credit, followed by the Sponsored Apprenticeship and Incentive Reimbursement Tax Credit. And the respondents that have non-registered programs are pretty much unaware of tax credits. So 75% said they weren't aware of the tax credit. And then those who didn't know what type of apprenticeship program they had, 76% didn't know what type of tax credit they had. Weren't aware of tax credits. So when we look at why employers didn't register their apprenticeships, a lack of awareness was the most commonly cited reason, but that was only 19%. Other reasons were associated with cost being too high, complication, not knowing how to register. So really about information. If we look at the smattering of responses, but here again, we also have a large number of others that we have to do additional analysis on. Senator Carrizo? You have your hand raised.
I can wait till after the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So when we look at when we asked employers what the state can do to encourage employers to register their apprenticeships, providing more information was the most commonly cited reason with 27%. And then tax credit assistance with compliance and registration. So a series of financial incentives are cited, as well as information and assistance with the process. And we also had a larger number, 25 respondents, or almost a third, that fell into the other category that we'll be doing additional analysis on. When we look at the complication related to apprenticeships, there wasn't a lot of concern about registering apprenticeships. So when we asked how straightforward the process was, most strongly agree, about a third agree. So almost 50% are saying that they agree that it was pretty straightforward. 37% were neutral. So only 13%, a very small group, said that the process wasn't straightforward. And we look at the ease of meeting the requirements associated with the apprenticeship. The biggest concern was really about the mentorship ratio, but that was only for 13%. implying that that was a very difficult condition for them to meet. So it seems like for the ones that actually are doing the registered apprenticeships, it's working for them, it's workable for them. And the ones that are not, there's really issues around information and understanding. And then using intermediaries is not particularly prevalent. So just about a third use an intermediary and most do not. And then of the employers that don't have apprenticeships, 83% had never considered them. And 16% had considered them in the past. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for information education to make this a little bit more widespread. So for us, our next steps are continuing the analysis of the data. So we have a good bit of work to do that and finalize the report. And then the completion of the survey for the labor unions and the sponsors and preparing the draft report for that. And we'll have an update on our findings for the next commission meeting. Senator Carrozza?
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that was done to, collect this information, because I know that part of it is just, you have to kind of keep the line out there to get the responses. I was interested in this whole question, and I may need the Department of Labor folks to guide me here. Are there employers that they're using the term that they have an apprenticeship, but it is not a registered apprenticeship? So meaning that they are offering something on their own, and they're using the term apprenticeship that could be their own training. But then if they were to go and officially register, that they would find that they're not meeting the criteria of a registered apprenticeship. So that in itself would be a barrier. So, I mean, my question is, and maybe is what our current system is, and if we have these employers who on their own have already invested in what they call an apprenticeship program, would in our job as the commission make it easier for these to work with them to make these apprenticeships become registered apprenticeships? I hope I'm stating this the right way.
It was very clear to me. So in following up on your point, one thing, we gave a definition of what an apprenticeship is, but we're not really sure what they understand in terms of hearing that definition. So they might say they have an apprenticeship program, but it wouldn't actually meet the requirements if it was a registered apprenticeship program. So at this point in time, we don't have a way to know whether or not someone, when they said they have an apprenticeship program, really has something that would meet that requirement.
So if that's the case, which I kind of assume that is going to be a mix, that and our goal is to increase the number of registered apprenticeships, but we also know that sometimes there are, I've heard some companies, like Seaside Plumbing is a, they're registered, but the conversation was they would still do what they're doing without being registered, but we would want them to be registered. So then I think there's going to be there's some businesses that maybe they believe they have an apprenticeship program, but it's not going to meet the current criteria of the Department of Labor. Would we work with them? I mean, this is for the commission, if what we're trying to do is increase the number of registered apprenticeships. And that's what I'm, and I know it's a little murky because we don't know what that breakdown is, but I just wonder of those that are saying they have apprenticeships, would they meet the current criteria of a registered apprenticeship?
Would it be possible, since Senator Carrozza directed the question to the department, that I jump in, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please, Erin, go for it.
Thank you. I think, Senator, I think that it's a great point. And I don't know if you were able to make the Central Region event last week, but for those that were there, they know that the question I kept asking when the unregistered apprenticeship programs were put before us, like, what would it take to get registered? What are the pain points? What's stopping us from making this happening? And a lot of the times the conversation came back that, like, we never really considered it that way. like, at least, I welcome others to chime in that were there. But I think, there's certainly things that this group and the department can take on to address those pain points. But then I would say too, like, there are some things, like the quality standards, federal requirements, that, we need to uphold that apprenticeship brand. The whole reason that I believe in apprenticeship is because it delivers for employers that model, and it provides a pathway to upward mobility for the workers. And so I think, there are some folks out there that, like, apprenticeship is a big conversation point, I think, across the country, right? There's lots of interest, there's lots of investments and things like that. So I think, it's in our interest, in my opinion, to really make sure we're upholding those standards, and doing a good job of explaining those standards and the why behind it, and then addressing the things that are within our control to make it easier for people, and to make sure that people are aware of the resources and support that are there. I think we have room to grow there, but with the resources and the splash and things like that around the apprenticeship brand, there are, like, unpaid opportunities, for example, that don't provide a pathway to upward mobility, that are, sometimes called apprenticeship. I don't think we want to lower our bar to allow for those type of opportunities, because it's not the reason that we're, in my opinion, behind this model and why we're committed to growing it. Welcome other commissioners' thoughts, but those are some of mine.
Yeah, no, I'll add to that, Secretary Roth, is, I ask the same questions all the time, right? It's like, why are you not registering the programs? And at least in the world of certainly what we've seen in sort of the IT and cyber side, where you've seen almost like an organic adoption of apprenticeships from some of these companies, it's really just because they need a hiring pipeline. They can't find talent. So it's a shortage of labor. And those who've done it a few times, and we've heard this from practitioners who've been doing this for a few years, is like the outcomes are there, right? It's good business. The challenge is, like, whenever I ask them, like, why not register, they don't see a benefit in doing it, right? There's no reason to, right? At the end of the day, right? So they're not getting more work. They're not getting any grants or subsidies. There's no public funding. So for them, it just seems like paperwork for the sake of paperwork. And so you've seen this, and actually I had a great conversation with ICF, right, about this as well, who are administering some of the federal WIOA dollars, right, around, or, to vendors. And I asked the same question, right, is that, they get companies to register because they actually had, there's funding attached to it. But then when you ask them, like, why aren't they registering these at states or other levels, like, there's really no benefit to doing it. And so I think that's one point of feedback from, one or two sort of industry sectors. But I think, again, it's some of the work I know our working groups are tackling right now. I don't know, Senator Roosevelt, you must have a point of view on this, and I know your hand's raised. Might be about.
Well, I do have a point of view on this, but I also had some other comments and questions. One is, I totally agree with Senator Carrozza about how it looks to me people saw the survey. I take it as good news and bad news. I think the bad news is that the concept of apprenticeship is so blurry to people that a lot of these employers call it, because the surveyors were asking about apprenticeships, they tried to fit in what they did to apprenticeship. Yes, we hire people. Yes, we train people. Yes, we advance them as they get more skills. I mean, that's what commonsensically an apprenticeship is. So they do that anyway. And most employers have mentors. There's always a supervisor in any job. There's someone who's showing you what to do, who knows better than you do when you're a new employee. So it's a little bit they're applying common sense and then putting a label on it that the survey instrument asked them. So I think that's the bad news in a way, because there really aren't that many apprentices, exactly as Senator Carrozza is saying, that would meet the standards of registered apprenticeship. On the other hand, it's really encouraging because it shows how simple the concept is for people to get and how simple it is for them to relate to their own experience. And I think that's a great advantage as we think moving forward on communication. So I just wanted to make that point that I agree. The question I wanted to ask was on that chart about why they weren't doing apprenticeships or pain points. There were 40, an N of 40, Anne, and I couldn't get my head around who are those 40? How are they selected? How'd you get down to 40 to ask that question to?
So they would be of the ones, let's see if I can actually get us back there. Let's see.
This one is 45. There was one that's 40. There's 43.
And I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'm trying to understand who those 40 were. They were the ones who had the pain points or the objections or why they hadn't done apprenticeships. It was some question like that.
So why they did it. So they say 45 about why they established them. And then
So these 40
why they did.
No, so these 45. So these are four. Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is 60 about why they didn't establish registered apprenticeship program, 62. So this group would be of organizations, respondents that had unregistered apprenticeships. This is why they didn't register their apprenticeship programs.
So these are businesses that said they had an apprenticeship, but had not registered it.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to jump in and say, when I reviewed it over the weekend, I noticed that there was a sample size of 40 employers for the feedback on the registration process question. I wonder if that's.
Okay.
And then, so those would be the people who actually had the respondents who had a registered apprenticeship. So that would be this one. So this is where you're seeing the 40.
That's the one. That's what I was thinking of.
So this would be of the respondents that had registered apprenticeships. This is their experience.
Gotcha. So on this one, now I understand. I would just make the point that these are by definition a self-selected group. They're the people who actually registered. And so it would be surprising if a majority of the folks who actually are registered would say that it's not straightforward. It was straightforward enough for them to be registered. So I feel like it's a little bit of a tautology. Just passing that thought on.
Yes, it makes sense, but I think it's also a bit encouraging because the people, this thing, we did it and it wasn't that bad. And I don't think it was they're saying it wasn't difficult. And then once they get in, the compliance isn't really problematic for them. So I think it's a piece of information that is encouraging to the other employers who don't have registered apprenticeships.
No, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. The other question that Jake was raising, I think the answer is, I think, obvious that there is so little benefit to register an apprenticeship to an employer at this point, unless they're very specific situations, which is why, and this comes back to our public sector tools and inducements, is the way countries who have gotten to scale like we want to, UK, Australia, France, Canada, is they've done it with financial incentives. They made it worth the while of the employer to go into their registered system. So I think that's the issue we're going to have to come back to when we look at it. But I think this reinforces that employers don't object to the concepts of mentorship. They don't object to the concepts of training on the job. They don't object to doing stuff. There is not enough incentive for them to do it at scale. With that, I will lower my hand.
Thank you. Any other commission members have questions on the survey or feedback or comments? Yes, Secretary Roth.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I just want to commend I guess your leadership, UB, everyone that put the work into this survey. I know that Chris McClarian contributed to kind of the behind the scenes work, but I think this is really rich information for us to build on. I agree with Senator Rosapep's last comments that it's kind of a both, right? In terms of the opportunities there and the positive things to take from it and the more work to be done. But I think this is going to be a very useful information for us. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to now open it up to if there's other commission business. We've finished with the three big topics today, so I'd like to open up for anyone on the commission to raise any other topics or any business that you'd like to discuss today. All right, going once, going twice. All right. Well, I want to thank the commission, right, for volunteering your time and for the expertise in carrying out this work. As you can see, it's a lot, and I'm really proud of the work, the commitment already shown thus far. We do have a steep climb ahead of us. We've got a tight schedule to really deliver what I hope is going to be a substantive and hopefully groundbreaking set of final report from our commission by the end of this year. And so that's really the end of our agenda today. Again, I'll remind everyone, our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 10th at 1 p.m. More information about that meeting, including a location, is going to be forthcoming. We're anticipating to make that an in-person meeting. And so with that, if I'm going to sort of open up again, a final sort of round. Any questions, comments, feedback? With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
You have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We'll adjourn today's meeting. Thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you.